My name is Amara. I used to think I could read people. I was wrong. That sentence would have been a warning if anyone had listened. It will make sense soon. I remember the night like a photograph you can't stop looking at. It was raining so hard the city blurred into streaks of light and shadow. He was late, smiling like the world owed him something. In those days, I believed his smile fixed everything. I learned his laugh, the tilt of his head, what song made him quiet. I learned to wait. My name is Amara Hale. I lived in a flat with tall windows that watched the Thames. I had a job I liked, friends who laughed, and a future that felt ordinary and safe. That was the kind of life he wanted me to believe in, ordinary, safe, and mine. I loved him because he taught me how to love again. I loved him because I chose to trust. You will meet him soon. His name is Julian. He is charming enough to convince a whole room of strangers that he has never lied. He is lazy with the truth, generous with the parts of himself that made me fall. But there are always parts of people they save, and his hidden parts were why I am telling you this now. This is not a confession. This is a record. I do not say the words revenge lightly. This is a story about how love can be measured in a mirror of lies, and about how the line between survival and destruction can be rewritten when someone decides that being betrayed deserves an answer. Listen to the first thing I say. Remember it. You will understand the rest only after the slow and careful breaking. Amara met Julian at an after-work exhibition. He arranged his life like a display, a joke at the right second, a shared memory that suddenly existed for both of them. He listened to her until she thought he couldn't look anywhere else. He sent flowers when she had migraines. He found small ways to make love feel inevitable. They moved in together after 6 months. The new flat smelled like paint and promise. Weekends were markets and old films and late coffee. Julian introduced Amara to people who admired him, not always because he deserved it, but because he asked them to. He wanted introductions, applause, and witnesses. Amara wanted to be more than an audience member. She wanted to be his partner. He let her think she was. Julian had a job in events, which meant he was often framed by other people's lights. His phone would buzz with names she didn't know. He called them clients, old friends, contacts. When she worried, he smiled and called her small, in the way people call something small to make it go away. There were secrets, of course. Small ones at first. A message that disappeared, a name he said was someone from uni, an evening he said was a meeting. Amara taught herself to accept not knowing. She had faith that love filled the gaps. And he filled what he wanted to fill. On their first anniversary, he gave her a ring without a stone and said, "I'm saving for something big." She kept it in a drawer, as if the promise were enough. In the quiet, she would press her thumb into the metal and pretend it was the future. It is easier to forgive 1,000 small cracks when the house still feels warm. The truth came in a weekend that smelled of barbecue smoke and wet grass. Amara had organized a small dinner for friends. Julian promised he would be there early to help. He arrived late and tousled, more distracted than usual. He stayed out on the balcony with a friend named Elise, the kind who knows how to keep someone looking at her. Later that week, Amara found a photograph, not on his phone but in the memory of a friend who had posted it. 2 shadows holding a drink. A smile in a picture that looked like permission. The city felt colder around it. Amara didn't storm in that night. She waited until the morning and watched him sleep like the way a person studies glass after a stone. She confronted him gently. She asked for the truth. Julian laughed and called it nothing, an overreaction. He said she had become controlling, a word that cut because it named the thing he wanted her to be, so he wouldn't look guilty. He promised to cut ties, to do better, while the telephone records told a different story. When she hired a private investigator, she told herself she wanted closure. She wanted evidence. The reports arrived like a second life handed to her: hotel receipts, messages, names. There was proof, and it was a physical thing, ugly and ordinary, not the dramatic scene she had rehearsed in nightmares. He'd lied, not because love required concealment, but because the life fitted a life he didn't want to leave. That night she sat on the floor of the bathroom, his copy of her favorite book open to the page he had never read aloud. On the cover, dust had gathered in the indentation his ring had left. Amara realized she had been only one of many things he collected: affection, trust, access. She felt used, not loved. Love asks for reason. Betrayal feeds on convenience. But even in the hot emptiness of that revelation, she was not the kind to scream in the street. She planned. She is patient by nature, and pain sharpened that patience into something artesian. A steady, cold will. This is where most people expect fire. A confrontation, a public shame, a dramatic revelation. I did plan something public, but not like they teach in movies. I wanted his own mind to be the stage. Revenge is a craft. It requires observation, rehearsal, and cruelty measured into timing. Amara did not want to destroy him with noise. She wanted him to unravel in ways that hurt where he had loved to feel strong: his reputation, his illusions of control, and the narrative he sold to the world. She became meticulous. First, she reassembled their life into evidence. She archived messages, saved images, recorded the little things he had said about other women without thinking. Then she started to give him space, the kind that looked like forgiveness. She would answer his short calls with the wrong mood, create a calendar full of plans she never kept. She let him grow comfortable in the cocoon of her supposed recovery. She contacted his friends with small truths wrapped in neutral language: a gift, a compliment, a fact carefully placed like a seed. "I found some old receipts," she'd say. "You might want to know." People who liked him at parties were not immune. They were prime soil. She didn't scream accusations. She suggested possibility. She became the quiet historian of his mistakes. Next came the subtle public unraveling. Julian was proud of his image, the man who could command a room. Amara fed him praise in front of peers, then offered contradictions when he was alone with those same peers. She timed messages to his colleagues, gently pointed out inconsistencies between what he said in private and what he said in public. The seeds she planted were unlikely to bloom quickly. They needed water in the form of other people's curiosity and the small, human mercies of gossip. At the same time, she learned to infiltrate his life at the seams. A friend of Julian's, someone who valued loyalty, began to notice small slips: a date that didn't match. Amara manipulated not only the external narrative, but his internal one. She asked him the kinds of questions that make people defend themselves in places they cannot be honest. She staged moments that forced him to choose between truth and appearance. When he chose appearance, she kept the memory of his choice like a photograph she could show later. There was an edge to her cruelty because she did not believe in vindictive spectacle. She believed in correction through exposure. His friends, his colleagues, strangers who had trusted his persona, they began to see mismatches. Invitations stopped arriving. An important event he'd been promised a lead on slipped to another name. His phone began to ring with clients who sought reassurance on things he had started, not finished. His lies, once useful, became heavy. People ask me later why I didn't tell him, why I didn't seek counseling or try to save what had been. My answer is simple: I had tried. He had chosen to be dishonest. I was left with the calculus of what I could do with that knowledge. My choice was to make him live inside the consequences of his decisions. And then came the hour he least expected. Amara arranged for a small, private screening, Julian's name on the guest list, a room full of people who had watched him act in public for years. She delivered a speech she had written to present a new project he was supposedly running. In her speech, she spoke of trust and transparency, and the cost of both. She did not mention names. She did not need to. The people in that room began to look at each other. A conversation that started as light drinks turned into keepers of memory. Someone spoke about hotel expenses, another had screenshots, another said they'd been promised things and never been paid. Julian stumbled at first, searching the room for a single ally. We had removed his stage crew. Public humiliation was not the point. It was the effect. Julian watched himself shrink from the center into the periphery. He tried to fight, to blame, to charm. For the first time since he owned rooms, he realized that his words had weight beyond their convenience. But I wanted the wound to be interior too. The public unraveling had prepared him. The private was where full collapse would come. Amara began to send him messages that sounded like longing. They were mixed with the evidence she had collected, messages tied to dates, receipts, the names of hotels. She told him she could make everything disappear, that they could start over, but only if he answered a question. Do you love me enough to tell me the truth? He answered with half-truths and apologies. Each answer made him lighter and more guilty. Each partial confession let her cut a piece of the narrative he had trained himself to live behind. She gave him chances, many of them. There is a cruelty in mercy if you know how to use it. The final piece of her plan was the part that would haunt him in private. She orchestrated a moment where Julian found a package addressed to him alone. Inside was a journal, bound and annotated, containing a meticulous compilation of his misdeeds, dates, times, photographs, receipts, and interwoven with her voice reflected in short, clinical entries. It read like a mirror someone had made to show not how one looked, but how one had behaved. When he read it, Julian understood fully, not just the facts, but the weight of every small betrayal. He called her afterward, voice raw, asking why. She told him, simply, because I wanted you to know the person you chose to be. He laughed at first, then sobbed. For a moment, he believed he could apologize his way out. He could not. The mirror did not break. He had to live with his reflection. The month following the journal became a slow disintegration. Julian lost clients. He lost friends who couldn't reconcile the man they loved with the man in the documents. He tried to rebuild. He called Amara every night at first, then stopped, then began to ask for meetings to fix things. She met him each time because she needed something he could not think to refuse. Attention. She planned the last act carefully. If revenge is cruelty measured, the final measure is an act that makes both the victim and the avenger feel the full cost. She was not naive. She knew that punishment rarely fills the hole left by betrayal. She wanted him to understand the shape of what he had broken. On a gray Thursday, she invited him to a place he used to love, an old bridge where they had once watched the city, without speaking. The river below moved with the indifferent patience of the world. He arrived with apologies shaped like excuses. He stood before her, as he had before, looking for the easy salvation of being forgiven. They talked. He started to cry. It was a sound that tore at the stitches of his pride. He asked her to go away with him, to vanish, to start again. He promised again. Amara listened like someone cataloging a specimen. Then she told him the truth he had never wanted. She had recorded everything they said that day. Every confession. Every plea. She said she would leak it all, but she would do something more. She would stage a final piece of evidence that would make sure his life could not be rebuilt. Julian pleaded. He fell to his knees and asked her not to. Amara reached into her bag and produced an envelope. Inside, a key. A name on a list of properties he had hidden. A photograph of him smiling in a hotel with another woman. The finality of it settled like smoke. What happened next was not a cinematic climax. He did not fight. He did not beg in the movie's way. He simply sat down stunned and asked her, "Why are you doing this to me? Why stop me from living?" She told him what she had been telling herself for weeks. He had chosen to be dishonest. He had chosen to believe that his charm made consequences lighter. She had chosen to make him live with what his choices meant. He looked at her, and in that look something changed. For the first time, his desperation was not for his empire, but for forgiveness. He wanted to be allowed to be human. He wanted to be allowed to be forgiven. She could have walked away then. She could have taken the moral high ground, the cold dignity of a woman who left his life and let him have his ruin. But revenge, the kind that burns slow, has another appetite. It wanted closure in the same currency the betrayal had been paid in: presence. She told him she could not just watch him disappear. She needed the ending to be honest. She needed him to feel the cost in a way he could not negotiate with. She stepped closer and whispered, "Then I will take you with me." He did not understand the meaning at first. He thought she meant humiliation or shame. He thought she meant to ruin him so utterly he could not find happiness anywhere. He did not imagine the shape of the tragedy Amara had chosen. Amara had planned the final scene in the same clinical way she had planned everything else. The journal, the exposures, the private humiliations, each had been a scalpel. The last act would be the final incision. She had chosen a poison not to kill him alone, but to ensure that the two of them shared a fate so intimate and final that no one else could claim the story and shape it for gossip. She wanted the narrative closed. She wanted the cost to be equal. He did not resist the first dose because he thought it was a sedative. She watched him, small and human and apologetic, the kind of man who leaves his life full of half-truths. She watched his mouth form the last apologies he would ever know. The first minutes were calm. He asked, in a voice that believed in bargaining, if there was a way out. She shook her head and said no. As the hours passed, Julian's words grew slow. He looked at Amara as if he were trying to memorize her face and said, "I loved you." The sentence floated between them, simple and impossible. She had learned to listen to those words before. They had been the weapon he used. Now, they sounded like a confession that came too late. At the very end, he attempted something like remorse. He reached for her hand. She let him. His fingers were trembling. She felt the last warmth and the last pulse. She thought then of the small things: the ring in the drawer, the book with dog-eared pages, the mornings when his arm had felt like a harbor. For one perfect second, she felt the human history between them, not the instruments of his betrayal. Then she felt nothing. The world kept moving. A pigeon landed on the bridge and tilted its head. A bus passed in the distance. The river kept swallowing light like a mouth closing. Amara closed his eyes and stayed there, holding the knowledge of what she had done. When the police came hours later, Amara did not panic. She told them the truth with the same clear voice she had used to prepare her records. She handed them the journal and the receipts and every document. She said, "I killed him." Her voice did not crack. She described the night, every measured decision. She would not for a moment play the part of someone surprised by their own violence. That would have been too easy. They arrested her. The headlines were merciless and quick and shallow. "Lover kills lover," the papers said. They ran the photographs of the bridge, of the ring, of the journal's cover. Some people called her a monster. Others called her a victim who had been pushed too far. There was no nuance in the way the city swallowed the story. The court became a stage where private grief transformed into legal definitions. In the months that followed, everything she had been, the woman who had loved and trusted and believed in ordinary things, was reduced to testimony. The prosecutor painted her as meticulous and dangerous. Her defense tried to show the history of the betrayal, the slow erosion of dignity. Neither could put into words the weight of those months before the last act, where dignity and rage traded places. When the verdict came, it was the tragic punctuation she had known since she started down this path.
Guilty, the court said.
Not just a verdict about a single night, but a judgment about a life rearranged into violence. They sentenced her to life, with years added for the planning and the coldness in the killing. The papers called for the maximum. Some callers wrote letters calling for mercy. The judge spoke of prevention and of deterrence. The law is comfortable with categories. It cannot measure the way trust fractures. In prison, Amara found a different kind of solitude than she had imagined. The walls were raw. Letters she received were often thin with people's assumptions. Some wrote to say they understood. Most wrote to say they despised what she had done. That, too, was a kind of punishment, to have the moral imagination of the world aligned against you. On quiet nights, she thought of the ring in the drawer. She thought of the list of hotels, of the receipts and photographs. People sometimes ask if she felt victorious then. The honest answer is no. The last line of revenge, the one you cannot return from, had cost her everything. She had traded love for something colder and found only an empty victory. In the end, the story she had written for him took the only form left, her own life measured in days behind glass. She had wanted him to understand himself, to live with the weight. He did, at the price of both their lives. The final irony stabbed deeper than any knife. In trying to make him accountable, she made herself the monster he could never be publicly accused of being. The world would remember only the violence, not the months of quiet shaping that led to it. People ask me now, you who listen, why she did not choose a different way. They ask if love is worth anything when betrayal is possible. There is no single answer. If there were, it would be less a story and more a manual. Amara chose a language she understood. She used the only power she knew how to wield: presence. She forced the man she loved to the last truth. She paid the price. The difference between her and the man who betrayed her is not that one was worse. It is that both of them were human, and that the world they inhabited did not offer a decent way to hold both truth and mercy. In the end, when you remember this story, do not look only at the last scene. Look at the months of quiet paperwork, of small choices, of patience turned into machinery. Look at the way a life can be eroded by ordinary decisions. And remember that revenge rarely leaves anyone untouched. My name is Amara. I did what I did because something inside me wanted to be seen, and because I wanted him to be seen. The cost was both of ours. If you believed for a single second that vengeance heals, remember, sometimes the healing is a rumor we tell ourselves too late. The truth is often colder. The last thing I remember before the world thinned was the taste of rain and the image of his face, surprised and small. Then the glass of the world closed.